Alright, hello. I know I've already made a video regarding the different room pages you can go and when you should be going different room pages, etc., etc. Um, but with the Conqueror nerfs that are coming this patch, there's been a lot of discussion, if not all of the discussion going on at the moment has been, okay, so Conqueror's getting nerfed, we're gonna jump boat, what do we pick now? Um, I have reservations about ditching Conqueror straight away. I think I've mentioned this a few times before. I think Conqueror will be fine through this nerf, but I think we're definitely going to feel it more than other champions like Riven, Renekton, other top lane bullies will definitely be able to proc Conqueror faster, and they won't really have as much of an issue procking Conqueror compared to us. Um, so the nerf is gonna hit Singed a lot harder than the champions he goes against, which obviously isn't that great. Um, but it remains to be seen just how damaging that nerf is to Singed. The general consensus in the community is that Conqueror is awful now. Um, just because it was such a pain in the ass to proc it in the first place, especially in team fights, especially in higher elo games. Trying to weave in those auto attacks wasn't optimal at all. And I think the reason Conqueror was so popular, even though it was a struggle to actually utilize the rune effectively, was because of the wider issue of Singed, where we don't actually have a keystone. So other champions such as Riven using Conqueror at the moment because you can stack Conqueror very quickly with Riven. Same with Renekton. Also press the attack on Renekton is really strong because his W and auto attacks are quite easy to get off. Like you look at Ornn or Shen with Grasp, things like that, where the keystone is actually useful for the kit of the champion. We don't really have that luxury on Singed. There hasn't been any rune in the Runes Reforge that is actually useful for the aim of Singed, particularly. I'm gonna go through each of the main keystones we have at the moment. This is just after the Predator changes, to give context to it. There's been different trends in the Singed mains community, and I'm gonna spend a minute talking about that just before we get into this, where there are three types of Singed players, and this is normally dependent on where the meta is and how Singed is doing in that meta. The three types are the AP Singed players, which is the predominant thing right now. This is what Socialist Singed got to Challenger with. It's pretty self-explanatory. You just build ability power. You get things like Rylai's, Leandra's, Protobelt, Zonya's, these sort of things, and you aim to do a lot of damage in the mid game and then snowball the game in mid game to end before you hit late game. And that is pretty successful right now. That's doing really well. Especially with Conqueror, because we can actually utilize Conqueror to ramp up adaptive force and also get healing back, so we can take more ballsy engages and fights where if we drag it out long enough we will win. It also comes with the Ravenous Hunter and the Taste of Blood like sub keystones, which are really nice to have. And you get the cut down, which is pretty good for taking those more difficult engages because you'll be doing more and more damage the lower you get. High risk, high reward sort of stuff. You get the tenacity from, I can never remember the name of these three. which also helps with the playstyle of Singed. And then you also have I can't remember for the life of me what this one's called either, like Triumph, which gives you health back, which is obviously good if you're going in for these risky engages. And that's basically, since Conqueror was buffed to being just broken on a bunch of champions, that's where Singed has sort of been sat for a while. He's just ran this rune page. You've just played AP, you've played aggressive, you've tried to dominate your lane so you can dominate the mid game, so you can win the game, and some point in between hopefully doing skirmishes in mid and skirmishes in the jungle. And that's worked out alright. It's still been very clunky for Singed to actually proc Conqueror. If you look at the stats after your games with Conqueror, you'll see that the amount of healing you did isn't anywhere near compared to, say, what a Riven would do, or what a Renekton would do, or what a Darius would do, etc. But Conqueror has been our mainstay, even though it's not perfect. So I'm going to rank these just for clarity's sake, so at the end of the video you can be like, okay, so this is this is this, etc. So I feel like I should put Conqueror in S. After the nerfs, I don't know where it's going to go. It might go down to A, it might go down to B even. It really depends how tricky it is to weave in that extra auto attack. I will say there is a way of doing a full combo with a Protobelt and Ignite where you land next to them so you can get the auto attack off straight away. So it is just like the time for an extra auto attack at the end of the combo to get fully procced. But obviously you have to use Ignite and you have to use Protobelt, so it depends. But the way you basically do it is when you're mid-fling, you Protobelt backwards, so you Protobelt into them whilst they're mid-air, and then you're stood next to them when they land, which is something to keep in mind. But yeah, I'm going to brush through the rest of the precision tree quite quickly because Pressy attack is obviously trash. If you're complaining about having to auto attack with Conqueror, then you don't want to be using Pressy attack because you need to get 3 auto attacks in with Pressy attack, and then that's it. It's not like you get a lingering effect for as long as you're fighting. It's just you do more damage to them for a limited amount of time. Lethal tempos, the same thing. You auto attack someone and then you get a burst of attack speed. Attack speed is really not what you're going for in Singed unless you're playing full AD, but I would highly advise against that for obvious reasons. I think Fleet Footwork has potential. Earlier on in Season 10, I was advocating for using Fleet Footwork if you're playing Proxy. I still think it's fun to do that. You can permanently proxy if you know what you're doing. I'm inclined to put in B tier because you can actually utilize it even if you're laning, because getting an for example, auto attacking a minion and then getting the move speed buff and then running up and flinging someone, you often wouldn't be able to fling them if you didn't get that move speed buff in the first place. So you can catch people off guard with it quite a lot, but it's one of those cheese picks where if everyone used it, then everyone would understand, like, oh, he's able to do this now, and then the rune would lose a lot of its efficiency. So I leave it at B tier because I think it's plausible that you would pick it up, but it's not necessarily going to be that amazing. It's kind of a niche pick. Electrocute, I would actually rank fairly high. For example, you can proc it if you have your Q on, you fling someone mid-air auto attack them, and then boom, you've got your 3 independent attacks on the enemy in very quick succession. Then you get that extra burst of damage. So that's a really reliable way of actually proccing Electrocute. The downside I see with this is it feels almost like it's too aggressive. Like it goes too heavily into the AP like AP playset, because at least with Conqueror you're getting that 15% healing, so you can survive a bit more, and having things like the tenacity and stuff like that. But if you're going the red tree, then you have just full offensive, which I'm not so like. I don't know how to articulate it. I'm not so swayed by it to say like, yeah, this is definitely going to be better than Conqueror, or this is already better than Conqueror, because I don't actually think they are. I think they have potential, and I think we will be forced into one of these very polarized playstyles. So yeah, it's a sticky one. There's more I could say on Electrocute, but I don't think it's really within the scope of the video, so I'll leave it out for now. Predator, I really don't know how I feel about Predator at the moment. I think the recent changes to Predator are actually a nerf for Singed. Initially, I'd thought they would be a really nice buff, and I thought, wow, Predator's actually going to be really good. But then you realise you can't use it as a mini teleport to get back to lane. You can't use it whilst you're at the very top of top lane to get all the way to mid lane very quickly. You have to use it like whilst you're in between the river, and then you're losing time, and it really feels uncomfortable and janky to use. So I'm inclined to put it into B tier, because like at least with Electrocute you can utilize it really, really well without any real detriment to you. But to utilize Predator really well, you have to be roaming all the time. You have to sacrifice your lane almost fully, and it doesn't always pay off. Like running at someone fast is fine, but then you have to have that follow up. And I feel like once you use Predator to just run in, you don't really have a response afterwards. It's not exactly like a Gragas jungle taking Predator or a Skarner taking Predator, where they go in, they lock down the person, and like with Skarner he brings him back to his team, or with Gragas he's able to get around and his kit allows for him to manipulate the enemy's positioning significantly compared to just being able to fling someone. Like, don't get me wrong, being able to Predator into the mid laner and goofling them is obviously really useful, but there's so many ways in which that can go wrong and that can be outplayed, that I feel like Predator's kind of bad, and I feel like people aren't dissing it as much as they should be. I think a lot of people still think Predator's going to be good, but I think they're wrong. I think all Predator really did was it helped those that already used Predator, but not all of them. So like Skarner would have gotten a buff from it. I've seen some Volibear jungles using it as well, but I don't think it's for Singed. Dark Harvest I'm going to put in a similar way, because it's a really snowbally rune and you don't really have any easy way of getting stacks unless you just beat your laner to death. But then you're also sacrificing a lot of the survivability that you would have got from things like Conqueror or Aftershock or whatever. So it doesn't really fit in that well. It works in the AP Singed build, but you still have to be a lot better than your opponent. So it doesn't feel like a very good rune if the reason you're winning with it is because you're significantly better than the opposition, because that makes me think that you would be able to beat your opposition with any keystone if they're that bad that you're able to just repeatedly kill them to get stacks, or repeatedly get them down low enough and do damage to them to get the stacks. Like realistically, you're not a Karthus, you're not going to be blowing people up with your ultimate that goes across the map. You're going to have to be getting into those fights and then hoping that you survive, or get your poison to linger long enough that you get Conqueror stacks, and then hopefully, not Conqueror stacks, to get Dark Harvest stacks, and then hopefully you're able to outscale hard enough that it's made the rune worthwhile. Really doesn't sit right with me. Halo Blades is not really useful for the same reasons that Liverpool Tempo isn't useful. It's oriented around auto attacks and you're singed. Summon Airy before the nerfs was actually, I would put around A tier. I wouldn't do that anymore because it had nerfs to it, and when you're using a keystone such as Summon Airy, you're losing half of the utility of it because it gives a shield as well. So if you're not able to give the shield and you're only using it for the extra like little bit of poke, which is like 10, 20 damage, it's really useless. Because to have like the idea with Summon Airy is you take it, you are using your Q, and then whenever Summon Airy is off cooldown, it'll shoot at the enemy that's in your Q. Because the game checks every single tick of your poison to make sure, oh, are you doing damage? Oh, you are doing damage, so we can Summon Airy. And that's the idea. It used to be played loads before it was nerfed, but now I would honestly put it around C tier. I don't think it's really worth taking. I know some people do still take it, but they really don't get good results with it. So, Comet, I'll put. Comet is basically just a worse version of Summon Airy, because when you fling someone, the Comet goes where you flung them, not where they've landed. So you're going to miss 100% of the shots you take with Comet. In the off chance that they're in your queue and you get the Comet, the cooldown of Comet is just too much to merit taking it. There used to be a bug with Comet where it would proc on every single Singed Q tick. So just absolutely decimate. In that sense, like, fine. That's really OP. But they obviously fixed that. So I'd class it with the rest of these because you don't really get any utility out of it. Like, if you're going to go for just raw damage anyway, you're going to go for Electrocute or you're going to go for Dark Harvest. It just feels like a worse version of Summon Airy because you don't land it very much at all. Phase Rush, I would put in S tier. It's very niche, but I do see some people who actually just take Phase Rush in all of their games and somehow make it work. It does suffer from the same issues that Predator suffers from, because it's like, well, why exactly are you running in? Because what are you going to do once you've ran in, sort of thing. Like, sure, you could get a Goofling, but you're still really squishy. The only reason I put it in S tier is because, unlike Predator, you can use it as a disengagement tool. So I would actually class Phase Rush as a very defensive room page. That gives you some like nice utility in the keystones. So like Nimbus Cloak or Celerity or Water Walking even. So yeah, it's better than Predator because with Predator you can't use it to run away anymore. You have to use it when you're actually on the hunt for an enemy. With Phase Rush, you can, if you're playing smart, that is, you can disengage by using your abilities in the correct timing. So your W counts as one of the 3 abilities used for Phase Rush. So you could Goofling someone and auto attack them midair, or get them damaged by your Q and then get a massive speed boost. So you can disengage because you've Gooflung them, and then you're creating that extra distance with the accelerated move speed you're getting. So at least Phase Rush has utility for Singed and actually does help him achieve partly what he wants to be doing, which is moving around, being disruptive, and not getting caught for it. Still, though, it doesn't help Singed dominate his lane. It doesn't help you do more damage or beat the opponent. It just helps you disengage from them if you get in a sticky situation. So, like, I advise taking Phase Rush into people like Darius and Nasus if you don't know the Nasus matchup, because you can cancel their lockdown abilities. So Wither for Nasus and Crippling Strike with Darius. But beyond that, it's not amazing. But, I mean, we don't have a keystone on Singed that is amazing. So S tier is It feels like it should be like S- tier. Is what I'll say. Grasp of the Undying is, I'd put it in B tier, but it needs some context. So earlier in the video, I mentioned the three types of Singed players. The one I've just gone through is the AP Singed, which is the common consensus of what we should be playing right now. It's what's working best in the meta. But the other two are supportive Singed, which we're slowly transitioning into right now, where people are doing a mixture of, they'll buy 2 AP items, they'll buy boots, then they'll buy a support item, then they'll buy another AP item, and then they'll buy another support item. But when the meta does eventually just power creep too hard and leave Singed behind, we will probably be going back to a supportive meta. If you think of Anken back in the day, and basically just the entire Singed community in season 5, season 6, I want to say, you had to play a support Singed. This isn't to say you go bot lane, this is to say you go top lane and you build support items. And just peel for your ADC, and that's how you win games. You don't go to win your lane, you just go to win the game by being useful in team fights. And with the tank Singed, obviously you're just building tanky, and you're just trying to face tank as much as you can when going into a team fight, and you try and run into the enemy team, pick up the ADC with a fling, and then you are tanky enough to survive the rest of the abuse you get. So in terms of Tanky Singed, Grasp is alright. Like, it lets you go toe for toe in lane with the empowered auto attacks. That's actually quite strong. It also gives you passive scaling health when you are killing things or getting the procs off with the auto attacks. I can't remember which one it is. So that at least is helping you towards your goal if you're playing tank Singed. The issue is, and the reason this isn't like an S tier thing, or like, oh my god, why don't we just play Grasp? It's because nobody's playing Tanky Singed at the moment. Or at least they shouldn't be. Because it's suboptimal in the meta right now. You do far better by trying to carry your games as AP Singed than you do by trying to help your ADC carry by being supportive or tank Singed. Obviously there'll be people that say, well, what about Searches? He plays Grasp, and to that I have to say, he plays for fun. He's not trying to be the best in the world at Singed. He's not trying to climb necessarily. When he plays Singed as, oh, Singed is a fun champion, I'm gonna muck around on Singed. And the clips on YouTube are obviously highlight clips, so they're not a very good gauge of how he is actually playing. That's not to throw shade on Searches. He's quite entertaining. When people think, oh, Searches is playing this is what's competitive, it's incorrect. Anyway, Aftershock, I would probably put in S tier. It's a bit counterintuitive with your E, because your E is the thing that procs it and is also the thing that throws the enemy away from the Aftershock radius. But it was buffed quite significantly earlier on in the season, and when you are playing Tanky Singed, you should definitely be taking Aftershock. Or even if you're not, the way I climbed initially was I played Aftershock, but I went an AP build because the defenses you got from Aftershock in the older version scaled independently, or at least were really high scaling. So you could afford to go AP because you would basically be getting a second layer of like the resists in your ultimate once you had procced Aftershock. And it does a lot of damage. It does like over 100 damage if it pops on the enemy. So you would be able to get a lot of first bloods at level 2 with it. They've changed it a bit, so the ratios on it I think are better, but they require you to have more armor or more magic resist. Um, so it's really strong for Tank Singed, but again, you don't want to be playing Tank Singed just yet. But Aftershock is a nice one. I recommend Aftershock if you're newer to Singed because you can get away with flings that you shouldn't get away with, so you have more chances to learn from your mistakes, because you'll get your ass whooped, but you won't necessarily die, so you won't have to go like 0 and 20 to actually get a good grasp of when you should and shouldn't fling people. Guardian, we don't use Guardian. We can't really use Guardian, even if we're playing supportive. We just don't have anything. We don't have like a Soraka W or a Braum W or like a Taric W where we actually put an ability on an ally, or like a Janet E. We don't have any of those. So we struggle really, really hard with actually utilizing Guardian effectively. Okay. I've just noticed we have Klepto here. Let's pretend this is Omni Stone, because obviously Klepto isn't in the game anymore, and we're going to slap it down there. The reason we put Omni Stone in brackets, all the way down here is because it's awful. You play it as like a for fun thing, like, oh, I'm just having a bit of fun on Singed, I'm not playing ranked. Because if you look at the way this is distributed, there's a lot of like alright runes, very seldom any good ones, and there's a lot of bad ones. So to cycle through all of the runes, you're more likely to get a shit rune than a good rune. So overall, it's pretty trash, because obviously if you roll into press the attack, you're like, oh, well, I've pressed the attack now, so I'm kind of useless. And then after that, you roll into Lethal Tempo, and you're like, well, I'm still useless. Then you roll into Hail of Blaze, and you're like, oh, well, I'm still useless, and then etc. etc. You're just shooting yourself in the foot. It can be fun to have that random aspect if you're just playing with friends or something, but don't take that into ranked. Glacial, I feel like should be in B or C, but I think it deserves B. Righteous. This is supposing that support Singed comes back into a prominent playstyle, which I'm assuming will be the next big thing. Support Singed is probably going to come back into fashion. Glacial can be good because on supportive Singed, you quite often go Righteous Glory as a first item. The AoE slow from Righteous Glory would shoot off slowing like beams or whatever they are, which can be really useful in team fights. Rylai's and the auto attack slow can be really devastating, because you have your Q, which is slowing, you have your W, which is slowing, you have your E, which is slowing, and then you have your auto attack, which is applying even more slow. So you can almost stun people if you get like a fling auto attack. And another thing to note with Glacial is you run up to someone, you fling them, then mid-air auto attack them to apply the Glacial proc, and then they can't really go anywhere. And that's a really good way of initiating fights. It's just that added layer of utility for just stopping the enemy in their tracks. Obviously, you could go the Hextech item that slows and get a lot of utility out of that, but I don't think that's going to see much play. Just because you're going to be moving away, if you're going to be taking Glacial, you're going to be moving away from AP Singed, so having an AP item like that isn't that useful anymore. And then I'm going to put Spellbook up here in S tier. It's not the best. It's one of those things where when the champion doesn't have a good keystone, you just take Spellbook, you take bits of utility. Something that's worth noting though, don't take the boots one, because you want to be getting boots earlier than this. Don't take the Hex Flash one, because it's practically useless. You want to be taking this is like called perfect timing or something like that. Perfect timing is really useful. Futures market is really useful. Time Warp Tonic is really useful. You can interchange it for minion dematerializer. That can be useful. And maybe approach velocity, because if you throw your W on someone, then you get a big burst of move speed towards them. However, I think it's more optimal to sacrifice approach velocity and go for Nimbus Cloak and Celerity instead. Just because with Spellbook, whenever you use a summoner spell, you're going to be getting a burst of move speed alongside it, which is actually really, really useful. But it still feels extremely lackluster. It's one of those things where, sure, like, we don't have a keystone on Singed anymore, so we're just going to default to taking Spellbook, so at least we can have more summoner spells, so at least we can have more utilities, so at least we can actually be a part of the game. It feels like we've conceded, we've surrendered when we take Spellbook. It's alright, it's not amazing though, but nothing really is on Singed at the moment, at least past the Conqueror nerfs. But this will generally be the landscape of how people play these, how people play with the runes at the moment. Which is a shame, because, like, back in the day we had things like Deathfire's Touch, which was fantastic for playing AP Singed. We had oh goodness, I can't remember. It's something Colossus that would, like, when we killed a caddy minion, we would get a big burst of health back, and like max health, and that was really useful for playing tank and playing proxy Singed. And it's sort of just fallen away. When runes were reforged, it really did a number on a lot of champions that still haven't really recovered. Runes aren't really that customizable anymore. Like, you can't really have as much fun as you used to in the old system. There isn't as much flexibility in this system, where there's a handful of sub runes that you can take, and there's a lot that you can't take because they're just not useful for your champion. And it sucks that we don't have the old system still, where you could really customize exactly what you wanted to do. It made the game much more fresh, much more fun. It enabled people like Ankun to create these amazing support builds that are really creative, and we don't really see that anymore. But I mean, it's Riot Games, so they're going to continue to mess things up. But yeah, this is generally how it's going to go. My prediction is that AP Singed will fall to the side a bit when the power creep gets too much, because at the moment the power creep is almost too much. Singed doesn't really win any lanes early on, and one of the primary things Singed was used to is winning lane early and then being able to snowball into mid lane to actually impact the game. Now he comes online in the mid game, and then it's a race against time to try and force as much as you can in the mid game to hopefully win the game. It's not great. It really is not a good position for Singed to be in at the moment. But yeah, it's whatever. we chose to play this champion. Anyway, I hope this is useful. I'm still gonna give Conqueror a chance, but I don't know. Anyway, see ya.